Please begin your talk. Professor Krishna, please.
Thank you, Dubey-ji. First of all, I want to say that this talk is not really about Krishnamurti's teachings. Krishna Ji said that consciousness as we know it is its content. And this talk is not about the content of consciousness, but it is raising the question about what is consciousness. And it's a mystery because neither the scientists nor the religious people are able to very clearly define what it is. Now, I'm not an expert in this field, neither in neuroscience nor in biology or Indian philosophy and so on, or religion. So I'm just going to talk to you like a lay person interested in this question and raising a lot of questions without aligning oneself with any particular view. That's how I understand the quest for truth to be, that one must observe, one must raise questions, but one must not stay with a conclusion. Otherwise, the mind becomes like the mind of a lawyer defending a particular point of view. And then that point of view is not necessarily the truth. So we shall posit the truth as the unknown. Various speculations are there about what consciousness is. The religious people, right from the Vedas, the Upanishads, Buddha, Jesus, down to our own times, Krishnamurti and Nisargadatta and Raman Maharshi, etc., have maintained that consciousness is separate from matter. It manifests through the organism that is available to it, but it is not produced by that organism. That's the religious view essentially. There are differences among the religious people about whether there is an individual soul and whether there is reincarnation and so on. But this part is essentially agreed upon in all religions, that consciousness is not the product of matter, that is something independent of matter, pre-existing. It was there even before matter came into existence. The scientific view is just the opposite. The scientific view, or I should say the dominant scientific view today, is that matter is primary and that everything else, life and consciousness, are epiphenomena. They have come about through collections of particles which have different properties, and one of the emerging properties is life and another is consciousness. Just as if you have hydrogen and chlorine atoms and you combine them together, you get hydrochloric acid, which has different properties. In the same way, they consider that if, as the atoms or molecules or quarks and so on came together, eventually life happened, which was just an accident. no purpose to life. And after that, there is the whole theory of biological evolution, of how complexity arose in that life forms, and eventually human beings resulted. So the religious view is that consciousness is associated even with the rocks and minerals. If you look at what Madame Blavatsky said in Theosophy, she said there is consciousness even in the rocks. Only it's not visible because it's unable to manifest in such a way as to be visible to us. But it is there. And then it develops further and manifests according to the organism that is available to it to function. So after that, there are the plants, and they have consciousness, and then animals, and then finally human beings. So there is this continuous evolution of the manifestation of consciousness, but consciousness has always been existent. It permeates whole of space, whole of universe. And they talk about also cosmic memory and cosmic consciousness and so on. Not only consciousness that manifests within us, associated with our brain. The brain is a matter. The body is made up of matter. But the life in it, the prana, and the consciousness which manifests through this is not the product of the brain or the body. It functions through the body, it functions through the brain, but it's not a product of the brain. So it was there. So variously called Brahman sometimes and so on. So that there is a complete diversity of views. The scientific view is just the opposite of this. And when I say in our exploration, we should not take sides with a view, because when you don't know what the truth is, on what basis do you take sides? On the basis of what you like, what suits you. And truth has nothing to do with what we like or what suits us. So it's important to keep an open mind and explore these issues both through observation, through our study, with a mind that is both scientific and religious at the same time. Religious in the sense of inquiring, but also into the immeasurable. And scientific in the sense of rational and aware of what can be measured and what is beyond science, which is not measurable. So the questions I have for the religious view, and I'm going to share the questions because I have said it's a mystery, which means I don't have the answers. If you have the answers, then it ceases to be a mystery. I'm going to share the questions without whose answers I myself don't know. So I'm going to only communicate the questions with you. One of the questions to the religious view raised by the scientists is, well, if there is a consciousness which permeates space, universe, then how does it interact with matter? Because the religious people consider that the order of nature has been produced and guided by this universal intelligence, which is part of the universal consciousness. So how does that consciousness interact with matter. Does it have energy? Energy, as defined in science, is ability to do work, which means forces have to act and move an object, and that force multiplied by the displacement of the object is the amount of work done or the energy transferred. That would mean that consciousness must carry energy if it is to act in a way so as to impart energy. That doesn't seem likely, because in science there is this law of the conservation of energy which has held throughout and has never been violated. And they have never taken into account an energy coming from consciousness. So if consciousness did carry energy and influence matter energetically, then the law of conservation of energy would have broken down, because they do count the energy of sound and light and electricity and gravitation and so on, but there is no such thing as the energy of consciousness. They have done experiments of collisions between particles and seen that the total energy after collision is the same as the total energy before collision. It may change form, but it never disappears. And mass is also a form of energy. So in nuclear reactions and so on, mass disappears and energy, large quantities of energy appears. You have to take all energies into account, but they don't count the energy of consciousness. In their experiments, if you try to concentrate on a material object and you test the energy of that object, it doesn't change. So consciousness does not impart energy. So things like in the Mahabharata, Shakuni could affect the, what do you call them, the dices which you throw in the game. He could affect in order to win. This is scientifically not possible. So telekinetics, science thinks that it is not possible, that consciousness cannot impart energy. So what is the role of consciousness if it has guided the development of the universe? It can provide information. So is consciousness akin to information? Information doesn't carry energy. It only informs. And there is a parallel in science. In quantum mechanics, it was postulated by Schrödinger when he developed wave mechanics, which was the precursor to quantum mechanics. He defined a function which is called the wave function. This wave function is a mathematical function. It has no reality except in the imagination of the mathematician or the scientist. But it has been defined and it changes with time. And what they find is that the way the wave function of a system changes with time determines the way that physical system will actually behave in nature. The two are parallel. It's a great mystery why they should be parallel. Why does mathematics apply in nature. Mathematics is a kind of symbolic logic developed by the human mind. And why does nature follow? That's a big mystery. Even today, nobody really understands that. But because one has found that it applies in nature, that's why the science has been able to use mathematics to develop so much. And the fact that it could develop using mathematics is evidence that mathematics is the language of nature. In fact, Galileo wrote long ago in the 16th century that mathematics is the alphabet with which God wrote the universe. That means that there is not God as an anthropomorphic God, not some human God sitting there and pulling strings, but nature's intelligence, which is, it functions in that way. And that way is described by mathematics. The order of mathematics is akin to the order in nature. But scientists accept this. So is consciousness something like the wave function and informs the system how to behave? They don't regard that the wave function informs the system how to behave. They only regard it as a parallel and a mystery as to why it behaves that way. So there is this question, because then there is no contradiction. Then there is not a consciousness is not carrying energy, and therefore the law of conservation of energy is not violated. But it is providing intelligence in the form of it. So there is also this intelligence, which is nature's intelligence. Nature itself is regarded as the whole manifestation of the divine, not produced by man from our brain. The order of nature is not the product of a human mind. Mathematics is, but the order of nature is not. And strangely, there is a parallel between that order and the order which mathematics describes. There are many situations, even in science, where the physical imagination fails. And you have to use mathematics to describe the situation. To give you an example, an electron behaves both like a particle and like a wave. Now, a particle is like a cricket ball, and a wave is like the wave in water, like in the sea. How can a cricket ball be also a wave on the sea? So because we have never seen any entity which is both a wave and a particle, therefore, we are puzzled. But in mathematics, you can write an equation which has both components, the behavior of a particle and the behavior of a wave, and you apply. You solve that equation, and the nature's behavior is predicted by the scientific equations. But our imagination fails in understanding it, but mathematics doesn't fail. So scientists now believe that there are limitations to our imagination because it is conditioned by only our experience. And therefore, it's all right. You can use it for modeling and things like that, but you must not mistake it for actual reality. For example, to us, it appears that space and time are completely independent of each other. But actually, it is one single entity called space-time, which is what relativity showed. So even in physical reality, the conceptions of the human mind begin to fail, because the human mind is conditioned, limited by its own experience and what it has perceived. And therefore, they use mathematics instead of thinking. So is consciousness something like that? Is consciousness like the wave function in mathematics, only supplying the intelligence? And what scientists are discovering by way of laws of nature and so on is just a description of the way that intelligence operates. It's not the cause. The cause is the consciousness. What you are seeing is the physiology, not the cause. Let me explain that with other examples. You see, if you experience fear, it is true that certain chemicals are developed in the brain. And conversely, if you put those chemicals in the brain through some kind of drug, it produces the emotion of fear in the human being or human mind. So it's a reciprocal thing, and we can't say which one is the cause and which is the effect. It's a circular relationship between the two. So what the religious people are saying is that what science is studying is all the mechanism of the operation of, but that mechanism is not the cause. Whereas what scientists are saying is that that is the cause. That the chemical secreted in your brain is the cause of the emotion. Not the other way around. That the emotion is there and therefore the chemical is secreted. The same thing about sexuality and so on. I mean, a man perceives a woman in the distance and all kinds of changes begin to happen in his body, because certain hormones, certain chemicals are secreted. So is the vision producing the hormones, or the hormones are producing the desire? It's a circular thing. Like the question of which came first, the egg or the hen, like that. So the religious view and the scientific view differ in which is the cause and which the effect. They consider this, the religious view is that consciousness is apart from the matter, guides the matter, and so on. But it's not caused by the matter. Why do the scientists think so? Because their theory of the origin of the universe in which we live is that it all began with a big bang which happened 13.8 billion years ago. They have come to it through a lot of observation of galaxies moving apart and so on, and then using the laws of nature, which they have determined, they are able to go back in time and say that they were all together and they must have therefore originated in an explosion. And with that assumption, they are able to explain most of the observed facts. So it's quite taken as almost certain that this is the basis. There may be some variations. There are some unknowns like what is dark matter and dark energy and so on, but that the whole thing originated in a big explosion that occurred 13.8 billion years ago is more or less accepted as a scientific fact. Now, at the time that explosion took place, the temperatures were of the order of 10 to the power 30 degrees Kelvin or so, which is billions of times greater than the temperature at the center of the sun. At that temperature, even atoms cannot exist. Even nuclei cannot exist. It all breaks up into particles, highly energetic particles moving and colliding with each other, such as quarks, electrons, positrons, photons, and so on. They combine, they break up again, and so on. So it's a kind of highly energetic soup of particles called a plasma. And that explosion took place in that. So there was no structure there. And because there was no structure there, therefore, there was neither life nor anything, not even atoms, just energy. Energy was always there. Energy is conserved. It can be in the form of radiation, it can be in the form of particles and so on, moving, kinetic energy, potential energy, gravitational energy, all that. Yes, but there was never a time when there was no energy, because energy is neither created nor destroyed. Earlier, they thought matter also was like that, would not be created or destroyed. But then when the nuclear reactions were discovered, they found that matter is just another form of energy. And it can be converted into energy, and that's a fact now, known to be a fact. So there was neither life nor consciousness, according to them, at the beginning of the universe. So they must be, therefore, epiphenomena. That means after that, they have a theory of how the whole thing cooled down. And then when it reaches sufficiently lower temperatures because of it is expanding, therefore, the quarks combine to form neutrons and protons, which combine to form nuclei, which combine with electrons to form atoms, and so on. So there is a whole development of matter, and all that is quite understood and mathematically analyzed and consistent with observations, and whatever they have predicted from this theory has been verified experimentally. So there is a strong basis for all this. Not all questions are answered, because there are still a number of unanswered questions. One of the major questions being that there is 90% matter in the universe, which we don't know what it is. It's called dark matter, 90%. And there is a lot of dark energy, which is creating a repulsive force, which makes the galaxies accelerate, not only expand outwards, but accelerate. That means there is a repulsive force acting between them. So all that is still unknown, and they are researching into it. And it gives them a great humility that what we know and what we are able to explain is just 5% of the observable universe, which interacts with light and emits light and so on. But they don't need life. In all this development of the universe, there is no need for life or for consciousness. So life is one epiphenomenon. That means as the molecules came together, they formed organic molecules, then they formed amino acids, proteins, RNA and DNA, and then the big step happened that a living cell was produced. Now that's a mystery. The science has not been able to solve that. They have theories about how life must have originated in the bottom of the sea, that it needed electrical discharges, ammonia, and so on, because then they can, and they have tried to repeat that in the laboratory, and they are able to produce RNA and DNA, and they are able to produce amino acids and proteins and so on, which are the building blocks of life materially. But it's not living, it's all dead. So what is life? We still don't know for certain. And they're working very hard to try to produce life in the laboratory, starting from chemicals and dead matter, but they have not succeeded. And the person who succeeds even in producing an amoeba out of it, or a single cell out of it, would certainly qualify for getting the Nobel Prize. But there is doubt whether that can ever happen, because there is no consciousness guiding that phenomenon. So what is life is still a conjecture. After that, when the first life form formed, after that they have a reasonable theory of biological evolution, of complexity from unicellular to multicellular organisms and so on, and the whole thing of how life started in the sea, and then fishes and plants and animals. Darwin's theory modified somewhat by later research and so on, but essentially what Darwin said, they maintain holds. The second thing which is missing in this whole scientific development is, how did consciousness originate? Consciousness meaning awareness. Now, awareness is something that is there before the conditioning. A child is born with awareness. He uses awareness to pick up language, because you produce the same sound and you say door, and you point to the door. He is able to see the door, and he is able to connect. His brain is able to connect the door with the word door, and that's how he picks up language. But before that, awareness is already there. So the question of mystery of consciousness is, how does matter produce awareness? Because awareness is completely separate, dimensionally different thing from behavior of matter, dead matter. And scientists are probing that. They're trying to produce feelings into a computer, because computers have language, computers have memory, computers can calculate faster and better than we do. And there is now also artificial intelligence, but a computer is not aware of what it is doing. Now, we not only think and calculate, but I am aware that I am calculating and I am thinking. So what is this awareness? That is the hard problem of consciousness, which is not yet solved. So scientists don't know. And many hardcore scientists deny the existence of consciousness. They say there is only the brain. And you call it consciousness, but it's all brain activity. So that's another direction from which they are doing research, namely studying the brain. So lately, in the last 2 decades or so, technology and so on has developed in such a way that they are able to map brain activity. They're able to find out where sexuality lies, what neurons produce fear, where does imagination occur, and so on. And they find, for example, that mathematical ability lies in the same part of the brain as musical ability. And therefore, they are using music in schools to promote mathematical ability. And finding also that experiments have been done to find that, yes, if you teach music to children, their mathematical ability also improves. So there's a lot of very mysterious things there. But they regard that consciousness is simply an epiphenomenon, that this brain formed as a consequence of biological evolution and neurons and so on. And there is no need for anything called the mind or consciousness. Now, Krishnamurti said the mind is outside the brain. He agreed that the mind is not produced by the brain. It's outside the brain, which is, he's using the word mind in the same sense in which we are using the word consciousness. And he also said that for me, consciousness is something that connects everything in the universe. Now, he was not a person who accepted things on tradition or because somebody else was telling him. Apparently, he came to it from perception. But scientists would deny that because there is no experiment, there is no measure, and so on. So unless something is established by the scientific method, they don't accept that as a fact. There are a lot of things that are beyond science. There is nothing that is anti-science, because if you can prove that it is anti-science, it will go out of science. I'm reminded of Feynman's definition of science. He said, science is a body of knowledge, some of which is nearly certain, some quite uncertain, but none that is completely certain. Now that's real humility. Because time and again, one has found that one came to a conclusion that this is final, and now this is the ultimate truth and so on, and then discovered that there were completely new vistas which were not within our paradigm of conception at all. And that changed. So that's how the relativistic change came, that's how quantum mechanics came. And so he said, we can never assert now that what we know now is the ultimate truth. Truth must always be posited as the unknown, and you must explore continually. And that's what their scientists are doing. And according to Krishnamurti, that is the approach also to be taken in consciousness. You must not come to conclusions. You must keep living with questions and explore. Because you don't know what the truth is. And the truth is not something that is comprehensible by the human mind, because the human mind is too limited, too conditioned by its own experience and its own knowledge. So in that spirit of humility, the exploration, the questions are the jewels. Therefore, there is still this question of, is there an intelligence which acts in nature? According to them, all this structure just resulted through the application of the natural laws, starting with those completely random motions of particles starting in the Big Bang. And all the structure developed afterwards. That means our own human body, the tree, the dog, and so on. Now, everything is made up of the same atoms. The dog, the tree, you and I, our brains, everything is made up of the same atoms, the same whatever are there in the Mendeleev's chemical table. Those are the atoms. And those atoms sit in different configurations. So the question is, what informs the atoms how to behave in the brain of a dog, how to behave in the brain of a human being, how to behave in a tree? So same atoms that are sitting there. Is there an intelligence which is dictating this operation, or it can all happen mechanically. Now, scientists say it is all due to RNA and DNA. RNA and DNA sequences inform what is going to happen. But this RNA and DNA, genetics, is just a word. How does it inform? Take a seed lying in the ground. It lies there for 6 months. If there is no living cell in it, it's a dead seed, it just disintegrates according to the laws of physics and chemistry, becomes part of the earth. If there is that one living cell in it, the seed waits for 6 months until the right temperature, the right moisture in the air and so on is there, senses that, and something happens and a small twig comes out. Now, not only that twig comes out, but it continues to grow and stays on, sometimes for hundreds of years, and sometimes even thousands of years, because some of the redwood trees and so on are known to be more than 3,000 years old. That means they have seen the Buddha walking on the earth, which we have not. So that single cell in the seed had the power to make all these changes of the kinematics in the soil, in the air, change that without any direction, any intelligence directing it, describing it. That's the question. It takes a lot of intelligence to make a computer. It takes a lot of intelligence to make a building, a laboratory. Does it not take intelligence to make a lotus flower bloom from the mud? According to the scientists, no. No intelligence. The religious people say that's nonsense. There is tremendous intelligence in nature, and that intelligence is part of the consciousness, the universal consciousness, which has guided. We may not understand how that consciousness communicates itself, just as we don't understand how the wave function, if at all, conveys, or is it just a parallel? We don't know, it's a mystery. I have watched trees growing on a hill station, on the slopes. Initially, they come out perpendicular from the soil because they are seeking light and they come perpendicular. But if they went on growing in that direction, they would fall because of gravity. So in order to adjust to that, they bend. After growing for some distance, they bend like that. You can see that in Rajghat on the slopes to the Ganges. You can see the trees are bent like this. So they sense, they are able to sense and move. If there was no, it was not a sloping ground, they would grow straight. They are able to. Is that not intelligence? If you look at the bougainvillea plant or any other creeper, you will find that it throws out shoots. And I have observed that if you have a wire or something going nearby, they throw out a shoot which grows faster in that direction and catches hold of it in order to get sustenance. So they have sensibility. They're able to sense that. They may not have eyes. They may not be able to think the way we think. And more recently, in the last 10 years or 20 years, people have done research on plants and forests, and they have found that they help each other. They communicate with each other. And when one tree falls due to breaks, a branch breaks or something, the roots of the other trees supply food to this tree, which means compassion. caring, communication between them. Now all that is nature's intelligence operating. The whole forest is operating like a huge living organism, not separately. Just as my right hand and left hand part of one organism. That's why when you scratch, right hand scratches the left hand doesn't say thank you because it's one body. Like that. It is. The ecologists say the entire earth and the environment around it is like one living organism. There's great harmony, balance, interaction, interdependent growth. Either you have the whole of it or you have none of it. You can't pick and choose, which is the mistake that man has made, because of which all these climate problems and so on are coming. So there is tremendous order, tremendous intelligence operating in nature, which is visible, can be observed, can be studied. And many scientists are doing that. They are studying that. Penrose, who's the Nobel Laureate of this year, Roger Penrose, who was the teacher of Stephen Hawking, who got the Nobel Prize this year. He doesn't agree with the idea that awareness is an epiphenomenon. He says you can never generate with atoms something which is awareness. Not only awareness of the external world, but we are aware of our inner feelings and so on. And when I think of a memory, in my memory, it can bring tears to my eyes, the thought of something in the past. To say that all that happens mechanically. Sir James Jeans wrote a book called The Mysterious Universe. And in that, he raised this question. Can all this structure, could it have resulted from random movements just guided by the laws of nature? And he says it's like saying there are 1,000 monkeys sitting on typewriters, typing at random. What is the probability that they will type out all the sonnets of Shakespeare? That is the probability of creating all this structure and the universe by completely random motion guided by laws without any intelligence directing the phenomenon. So there are lots of questions both about the scientific view and about the religious view of consciousness. And then, of course, there are consciousness phenomena. I mean, science doesn't even know what consciousness is, can't define what consciousness is, denies the existence of consciousness. But there are consciousness phenomena, that near-death experiences, you can read about it, near-death experiences which people have. There is all those occult perceptions. Annie Besant and Leadbeater studied matter. They said, we put that mineral in front of us on the table. We make ourselves mentally smaller than the smallest particle in it, and we are writing what we actually see. It's not speculation. It is a record of observation that we are making. They used consciousness to study that. That's, that's occultism. And scientists laughed at that time on the basis of their predictions. They predicted these triads of quarks, which now scientists know makes protons and neutrons and so on. They saw that, and they have written about it. And now scientists are studying what they have shown through occult phenomena, through consciousness from their studies, and showing that there are a lot of parallels. They also made mistakes. They are detecting those also. But the fact remains that there is this. In Ayurveda, how did the people determine which plant will treat which illness or disease? They didn't do these double-blind experiments and trial and error things and so on. So the rishis of old in India, they had more of this occult power. They functioned through consciousness and so on. They could feel the plant and know from there. So there is a whole vast knowledge which can be obtained through consciousness, which we have lost because we believe only in the knowledge that comes from thinking. And we have promoted that kind of thing. Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, is supposed to have had a lot of these occult powers. She could, without visiting a library, know what was there in big books and so on, and she has quoted out of that without ever visiting those places. Now, these are all people, not charlatans. They had no ulterior motives to do all this. Annie Besant was a great crusader for truth in her whole life. They may be mistaken, but they cannot be accused of fraud, is what I'm saying. So there is yet a lot that is beyond science, and the whole field of consciousness phenomenon right now is beyond science. And science, as it is today, doesn't require, doesn't demand that life should have been there or consciousness should have been there. The whole universe and its development could go on independently of a single living entity or conscious entity in the world. That's the scientific view. So the whole thing is, there is still this whole mystery about what consciousness is. We are part of that mystery. And I'm just describing the mystery. I don't know the answers. Thank you. I'll end it here.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.
एक शेर आपके लिए, जाहिर के बातिन आखिर के अव्वल, फर्स्ट और लास्ट, मैनिफेस्टेड नॉन अनमैनिफेस्टेड, जाहिर के बातिन आखिर के अव्वल, अल्लाह 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 अल्लाह. That is what I felt listening all this.
That's a belief.
Professor Krishna, I have a small question. It's a beautiful talk. Is it possible to think of distance healing? Healing from a distance?
I have no knowledge of this.
Because you were telling that one's reaction can be, one library, what is content in a book can be accessed without even going to the library. Can a doctor cure a patient without really visiting the patient? I mean, prayer is effective. Why not this also?
Not a doctor, but there have been cases. My father used to tell me of a man in Andhra who was known to cure snake bite. And the government gave him a telephone which was free, because anyone who had a snake bite anywhere, if he telephoned to this man would tell that no, the patient has died, I can do nothing. Or he would say, go back, he is cured. And it got cured. So I don't know whether all these things, how it happens, but like that, there are a lot of mysterious things. Krishnamurti himself did a lot of healing, including things like blood cancer and so on. But he said that there is an energy which does it all. I don't do it, but there is an energy which does it all.
Professor, is it worthwhile to statistically examine and explore the possibility of such things rather than accepting or rejecting the hypothesis?
Yeah, I'm saying don't accept anything. I'm saying we should investigate, but if you are interested, you would have to apply yourself to investigating. But you investigate only something in order to discover what the truth is. If you already take sides and you think that is what it is, that's what you will find. So then that is not the truth. There is a lot of research which is simply like not an open-ended research, but the mind is functioning like a lawyer trying to selectively look for evidence only for its own theory. And then that's not real research or quest for truth. So long as you are approaching in that way, I mean, I think that the true scientific spirit is that, to posit the truth as the unknown and explore. And Krishnamurti said the true religious spirit is also that. Posit the truth as the unknown and explore. Don't stay with conclusions, but stay with questions and observe and explore. And if you are able to see the truth and perceive it, only then you can be sure that you have the truth for it. So the spirit of science and the spirit, this kind of religious spirit, are identical. Only their questions are different. The questions they tackle are different, but the approach is identical. That's what I feel.
Thank you, sir. It is nice. I'm doing some research on this particular area on a statistically developed samples. About 40 people I have chosen and see whether it is really effective. I have made some hypotheses.
Yeah.
If you want to see.
Similarly, there is a man called Ian Stevenson in the University of Virginia, professor of psychology in University of Virginia, who has done a lot of research on reincarnation. Trying to understand whether reincarnation is a fact or not. So he and his students have studied something like 3,000 cases of children who had memories, who were born with memories of their past, of past life.
Hello.
Including language memory,
Hello.
and where they lived and all that. Yeah? And his results, because he's a scientific man, his results roughly are that 1,000 cases were fraudulent out of those 3,000. That another 1,000 were uncertain. But there was 1,000, namely 1/3 of the total number of cases, in which no other explanation was possible. Now that kind of study has meaning, where you have not taken sides and you are really collecting data to find out whether what is true or what is not true. Of course, it's all in the field of knowledge. This has nothing to do with what Krishnamurti's search for freedom and so on. It has not. This is all in the area of knowledge. That's why I said that today's talk is not a talk based on the teachings. Krishna Ji was not interested in all this. But knowledge also exists. We all study in school and college and all the scientific. But you should never mistake that for wisdom.
May I ask question?
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah. Parik sir, please go on.
Yeah.
Please make Dubey Sahab as host. Please make Dubey Sahab as host.
Yeah, he's able to talk. Yes, yeah, go ahead. Arshad bhai, go ahead.
Okay. It seems to me that the mind can understand science, but science cannot understand mind. Because in science, which is based on knowledge, and there's a duality in, there is a scientist and then there is something to be known. But in understanding the mind has to understand itself. The science cannot do that because science is knowledge, whereas the mind is beyond knowledge. So
Yes.
that is.
Yeah, my response is that our life has two aspects. One which may be called measurable, the other which is immeasurable. Now, consciousness is not measurable. You can't measure how much you love your wife or girlfriend and how much you love your mother. You can't measure that. But whole scientific method is based on measurement and evidence and proof and so on. So that's why I say there is a lot that is beyond science. And consciousness phenomena are right now beyond science. But science also does not deny, a scientist doesn't deny data, observed facts. He may not be able to explain that fact, but you cannot deny observed facts. So when there are scientists who deny the existence of consciousness, that's a belief which they have. They are not open-ended scientists. That's called scientism. It is not science. If you say, I don't know, that is science. But if you say it doesn't exist, what is the proof that it doesn't exist? He is using consciousness to do his research work, but his science cannot explain what he is using. And he denies it, therefore. That means he's saying only that exists which I am able to explain. That's a ridiculous statement. It's like saying this country is the best country because I was born here.
We have other people asking questions. May I go
Yes, sir.
to
Yes, sir.
Ram
Yes, sir.
Krishnan? Please
Yes,
go
sir.
ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, this is purely a physics question to
Yeah.
Dr. Professor Krishnan. The Big Bang theory says that 10 billion years plus there was a Big Bang and universe was created. But should the creation of the universe, should it not include even the creation of space in which the Big Bang happened?
Well, they say that space and time also originated at the same time. That space is not really empty space as we imagine it to be. It has energy and it has tension in it, which is why gravity is able to bend space. It's like a membrane with tension, like a balloon. So the surface of the balloon has tension in it. So space is like that. It's not now regarded as just an empty, just something empty within which everything else exists. It's no longer, that concept has been given up after general theory of relativity.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Krishna Ji. I would like to ask one question.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, your talk is really wonderful and we really enjoyed a lot. My question is, you have explained different kind of energy, that is kinetic energy, potential energy, gravitational energy. Apart from that, there are the two kinds of energy, which is called entropic energy and anti-entropic energy. At one level, you talk about energy, and another level, you talk about consciousness and intelligence. These three things can taken together, because in Tamil culture, it says that the God or whatever it is, and the world and the life force all existed together from time immemorial. It is there. It is not been created. So K also talks about awakening of intelligence, which means that intelligence is already there. He doesn't talk about intelligence coming into being, or it dies, or it goes away. So can you explain all these things? Because an entropic energy, as far as I can understand, is an energy which has a destructive force within itself. And anti-entropic energy is an energy which can renew itself forever and survive. Can you explain on this? Do they make any point in this?
Sir, in science, entropy is very precisely defined. There is no such thing as entropic energy. It is integral dq by T. dq is the change in energy at the temperature T, and integration of that is the In science, terms are very precisely defined and measured. And when they are used in general in society, in language, they are not used with the same definition. So it is true that the entropy always increases in all interactions. And that increase in energy is correlated with increase of disorder. And so when you have order forming out of disorder, then it goes contrary to the second law of thermodynamics, which is that the entropy always increases. But it depends on what you're considering as your whole system. For instance, when order forms, when a tree grows, for example, the atoms come into orderly thing, there would be latent heat and so on evolved in the process of formation of that order. So in the universe, the total disorder, total entropy which you count will increase. So it has, you have to define your system. What is the system? And in the whole system, the entropy has to increase, not in any part of the system.
Thank you, sir. I think Sudeshna, you are next. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes, I have, although it's been partly answered, like we individual, the sense of individual, we say is according to some conditioning. So, Professor, I have a question about our memory. Is it situated in our brain? Because if our brain is injured, we sometimes lose our memory. And then does it remain with us even after death? Because the past lives of Krishnamurti, Buddha, they have been, they have been read earlier. So here I get confused. So they say that individual is an illusion and basically it is the whole of consciousness. So how does past life memories remain after death? Where does it remain? Is there any physical existence of the mind? Does it mingle with the whole of consciousness after death? What is your understanding of it? I would like to know.
Yeah. My understanding is that science doesn't believe in any of this. But the religious people have talked about cosmic memory, including Krishnamurti, that
Right.
there is a memory which is not in the brain of the human being. Scientifically, when they have studied the brain, they are not able to find out a single region where all the memories are contained. It is distributed. Certain memories are in the stem, certain memories are elsewhere, and so on. And when the brain gets damaged, another part of the brain is able to revive and do the function of this other part, and so on. It's a fairly complex system which is there in science, but they don't accept any cosmic memory and so on. A man like Krishna Ji had access. They say that a liberated man has access to the cosmic memory, and from the cosmic memory, he can pick up anything he wants. Now, I don't have any. I don't have any occult powers, and I don't have any such first-hand knowledge of it. But I can only tell you some conversations I've had with Krishna Ji. He said that he has lost completely all memory of his childhood. Actually, physically, something happened to his brain and he lost all that memory. He said, whatever I tell you about my childhood is what subsequently people have told me, and I'm repeating because I rely on them. But I have myself down directly a memory. He did not remember the roads inside Adyar, although he lived there till 38 years of age. I remember my house where I was 6 years old. I remember the entire arrangement of that house. So it's a great mystery what happened to Krishnamurti. And There are several instances where he could read thoughts in another person's mind. And I have quoted a number of them in my book in anecdotes. There is a chapter on anecdotes with Krishnamurti. And in that, there are a number of instances where he has healed people, where he has forecast things, where he has read. And these are quite genuine people like Achyut Patwardhan and Radha Bernier or Narayan. They are not people who would tell lies. So I rely on that. And there was Rohit Mehta here who was healed of complete paralysis by Krishna Ji. How that happens, I don't know. And I think even Krishna Ji didn't know. Because when he was asked, he said, sir, there is some energy which works. I don't know, right from childhood, that I have had this power in my fingers. So there is a lot of this thing which exists because it is demonstrable, and all these people are not telling lies. So it exists, but it's all beyond science right now. So science has no idea about this. Similarly, there are astrologers who make forecasts absolutely accurately. There are 10 times more astrologers who are fraudulent, but that's a different matter. How does even one astrologer tell accurately everything about your past life as well as maybe the future and so on? So there is something in that whole thing of astrology and so on. It's not completely gone, but I think it's important just to know that these things exist, but not depend on it, not get attached to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Dr. Atul Bhatnagar, please go ahead.
Namaste. Yes.
Namaste, Atul.
Namaste. Namaste, Krishna Ji.
Banaras mein ho?
हाँ जी 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 at BHU.
Acha, acha.
हाँ at BHU. Enjoying the Sunday sun and the beautiful sharing that took place through this dialogue of yours and the question answers.
Welcome.
It is really wonderful that a talk of entropy, that is the disorder and order, came into this sharing of today. And I have a question.
Yeah.
That when Krishna Ji says to remain with what is, and what is whatever is happening, that is anger, jealousy, conflict. So disorder or entropy becomes a fact, and one is remaining with the fact. And then next he says, observe it, don't do anything about it. And by observing itself, one sees the falsehood or the trouble that is created, the trouble creator, that the self is there. So self in a way is the source of that entropy or that disorder. And so do you feel that Krishna Ji's approach of observation, of being perception, where the observer and the observed is same, is one, and there's no duality, is order. So by seeing disorder, by observing disorder, being disorder, one reaches order in that sense, so the entropy decreases. So how do you correlate these two things that we read in according to thermodynamics second law, that entropy of a particular system is maximum always, its potential is always more. So there's a disorder always happening, either in our psychological world or in the physical world. But
Yeah,
by being with it and not doing anything, order can come. Can order come?
Give me a chance to answer your question.
Yes.
I've got your question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The confusion is arising because disorder as defined scientifically is different from the disorder that Krishna Ji talks about. The disorder due to jealousy or anger and so on is within our consciousness, a conflict which is arising. It has nothing to do with the scientific idea of entropy. Yeah. So there, disorder is also defined in science. So when you take a solid, the atoms are all arranged in an orderly fashion in a lattice. Then you heat it, it will melt, and the liquid the atoms will be moving about randomly and so on. So you have disorder, and you can show that the entropy has increased in doing that. You heat it still further and it will vaporize. And then the gas is a complete disorder because all the atoms are moving about randomly. And you can show that the entropy is higher. So disorder there is perfectly defined. Whereas this disorder, psychological disorder that Krishna Ji is talking about, it has nothing to do with that disorder. Therefore, the concept of entropy doesn't apply there. This kind of mistake often happens because energy also is a word which is often used both in science, but in science it is defined very precisely. And elsewhere it is used loosely to imply intensity, to enthusiasm, all kinds of things, ambition, and so on, that he has a lot of energy. He was propelled by that, his desire and all that. That's not the scientific term of energy. So you have to be careful because the same word is used, but it doesn't have the same meaning there.
Thank you, sir. I think we have now Mr. Parvez Ahmed. Please unmute yourself. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, my question was, like, why our understanding of the intelligence and consciousness obscure rather than easy? Now, if our baggage of knowledge prevents this easy understanding of intelligence as it is, then are there species other than human that could possibly be having superior understanding of the intelligence?
Depends on what you mean by superior. I don't consider human beings to be superior to animals. The animals have not created wars, and they have not destroyed their own species and other species and the earth to the extent to which man has destroyed. So sometimes our idea of intelligence as being powerful is itself something that needs to be questioned. It's not the knowledgeable man who is powerful, who can dominate on others with his knowledge and so on, is not necessarily a more intelligent person. And the so-called intelligent people have brought the earth to great calamity. The wars are created by highly intelligent people who are diplomats and army generals and scientists and nuclear scientists and all these people, highly intelligent, so-called intelligent people, but they are responsible for the destruction of the earth. So depends on what you mean by intelligence. Krishna Ji didn't regard any of this as intelligence. If you read him, you will find that he says, there is no intelligence without compassion. But what we call intelligence in education and so on is completely devoid of any concern about compassion.
In fact, I was referring to the nature's intelligence, sir. I mean, why is it more difficult for humans to interact or understand that consciousness or intelligence instead of being easy?
The problem is with us, not with nature. The problem is with us that we are able to use imagination and create illusions, and out of that create division and so on, all of which Krishna Ji has explained very well. That's not part of nature's intelligence. We use intelligence to divide and fight and look down on others and things like that. That's our problem, which is what Krishnamurti is saying that we need to solve. If you could really live with nature's intelligence, which is harmony, cooperation, interdependence, love, compassion, and so on, all that is part of nature's intelligence, and not substitute it with your own intelligence, which is all this imagination, power, ambition, and so on, achievement. then there would be harmony. And for millions of years, human beings lived that way. It's only after this industrial revolution and so on that we became capable and very, very greedy about destroying nature and using it as a resource for economic development and for fulfillment of our greed and our desires and things like that. All that is coming into question now. People are not accepting. It's too late. They're not able to reverse that. So there is a lot of unintelligence. And human beings are not superior to animals or plants. Depends on your definition of superiority. If you consider more capacity as more capability as intelligence, then you are superior. Pradeepji,
Thank you. That has answered my question, sir.
Sir,
Yes,
Sir?
Mr. Prakash Maheshwari, please go ahead.
sir, in the book of life, JK says that one must have great feeling, not sentiment, not emotions, not mere excitement, not sensation. So, what is the difference between feeling and all these things?
See, there is natural feeling like the perception of beauty is not coming out of your imagination or your education. You can see the beauty of nature, the sunset or the moonlight and so on, and you feel that. That's true feeling. Then there is sentiment, the sentiment about your own country, the sentiment of a Hindu that the cow is a goddess and I must worship it and so on. So it feels very differently for the cow than he does for a horse or for a goat. Now that is coming out of sentiment. So you have to distinguish between the two. There are genuine feelings which are natural and there are feelings which come out of your own conditioning and which will be different for different in different cultures and so on. So Krishna Ji is talking about the natural feelings as the sensitivity. Now, sensitivity is not something that you get through reading books or hearing lectures and so on. It comes through contact. And that's why he tried to change education, so that education helps a child to grow up with sensitivity, not conditioning, not coming from conditioning, but actual feeling of compassion, of love, of beauty, that feeling.
Thank you, sir. I think, George, you have a question. George?
Yes, sir. Krishna is just, you explained about that intelligence of the nature. That is what in discussion with Sunanta Ji and Krishna Ji, the book called The Tradition and Revolution.
Yeah.
This nature's intelligence is explained as anti-entropy. Since we are acting from the me, from the self, and that self, they explain it as an entropy. And that is one part. Another thing is there is an energy, movement, space, and time. All these things are in one parallel line. And the question arises, K says that thought is a movement. So the question is put, where does that movement come from? Where does it move? For which K says, thought moves in a space it creates as it moves. And they talk about the stillness of the mind further. So the very movement of thought is from a space it creates as it moves. So it is together. K never talked anything of a thing as separate or together only. It is like observer and the observed. And both the things joining together forms one movement. For example, the movement of tide, the going out and the coming in, joining together is a one movement. It is a unitary movement. So it is not, we cannot separate those two things. I think that is what K talks about in his entire life. Can you comment on that, sir?
No, because the word entropy is being used here in a sense quite different from the way scientists define entropy. So the confusion comes because of a wrong use of a word taken out of one context and put into another context. All that has nothing to do with entropy as defined in science.
Thank you.
प्रदीप जी हाथ उठा रहे हैं, कोई जो भी देख रहा है, प्रदीप वर्मा।
अनम्यूट कर लो प्रदीप जी, अनम्यूट कर लो प्रदीप जी,
अनम्यूट करके बोलो प्रदीप जी।
ये लास्ट क्वेश्चन आ गया है करीब।
हाँ,
अनम्यूट करो, पहले अनम्यूट करो।
अनम्यूट, यस।
हाँ, आप बोलो।
Professor,
जी,
you know that psychologically observer is observed. Is it true for the seers also, the known established seers? Are they like living mirrors? Because mirror reflects things as they are. But mirror is a dead thing. Are they like living mirrors? Because or they are as observed as others are normal observation observers.
Yeah. See, in Buddhism also, किसी वस्तु को जस का तस देखना.
जी.
You are not projecting anything from your memory or your images onto the object. But then you are seeing the object in a completely undistorted way, and that is the truth. So the sages, if they are really free, then there is no observer there. The observer is the conditioned part, which is projecting. So the observer doesn't exist. It is the observation is without an observer. It's just aware of what is. It is aware of what is, and it's not contributing anything from its side to what it is observing. Normally, you see something, then that sight goes to the brain, and the brain throws into consciousness all similar experiences and memories and other objects which are like that object, all into consciousness. And so it mixes up in the feeling. And so it becomes complicated. But in the case of a sage, if it's a true sage, there is no image and no contribution from he's not a conditioned entity. He has pure awareness. So he's only watching and he's not projecting anything on it. Then you will see the cow as a cow and a horse as a horse and a goat as a goat. But if you project like a Hindu or an American, then you don't see the cow as just a cow. You see it as either a goddess or as beef. So.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sushilji, I think we have come to the end of the session now.
Yes.
The last question.
Gajanan Rao's finger. You can't ignore that.
Yeah.
Give him the last
Dr.
word.
Gajanan Rao, please, sir, go ahead.
10 minutes increase. 10 minutes increase for Gajanan Rao, please.
Please unmute, sir. Please unmute. Unmute yourself.
And then announce the speaker.
Gajanan, unmute yourself.
Unmute. Yes. This is okay now.
Sometime. Okay. Thank you for coming, Rao sir.
Your talk was really explosion for me because I am not a very scientific mind, and mathematics is my fear, even from today. But it was beautiful. I stayed here to listen to you. I joined here to listen to you. And what a great talk it was. It's not just to praise you, but I'm glad I was in the audience. I have a question, an ordinary question about when you said the consciousness outside the mind. but is a consciousness not contributed to by the mind, human minds, or any other species minds? Whole consciousness, which is a river of, say, human consciousness, is it not?
Yeah. Krishna Ji said that consciousness as we know it is its content. And that content is a conditioned content.
Yeah.
If you free yourself of that, then there is only pure awareness. There is no contribution from the content. And so the consciousness without content is pure awareness.
But consciousness is its content, which is...
No, consciousness is consciousness as we know it.
Yeah.
Be careful about what Krishna Ji's words. Consciousness as we know it is its content. But when there is no content, consciousness, Krishna Ji was very aware, no? If he has no content in that, that means he is not projecting, he has no images from his memory. Nothing is coming from his memory, but he is completely aware. In fact, that is one of the preconditions for being fully aware, is to be free of all these projections from memory, which means ultimately free from thought, because thought is a product of memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the same thing as silent mind, it's the same thing as observing without the observer.
So it's just a conjecture. If all the human beings get highly evolved and clear their consciousness of all the content, there will be no human consciousness at all. It's a very hypothetical, I'm just saying.
No. Then we would be sharing the true consciousness, which is awareness and seeing facts. Right now, you and I feel different from each other because my illusions are different from your illusions, and we fight over our illusions. If you have no illusions, you don't fight. To you also that is a door, and to me also that is a door. What is there to fight? So, but when you see one of them sees it as a god and the other sees it as a devil, then you fight.
So the consciousness will be full of facts, not imagination.
That's
not
right.
Distortion.
That's right.
Okay. But would you think from all that you said and have learned of science, that one day science will be able to also define which you think is mysterious and what some mysterious people like Blavatsky had done, which science is not able to prove. Probably those who are working on it will be able to add to solid scientific matter, which is in a cloud now.
There are certain limitations imposed by the scientific method, which accepts as something as a fact only when it can be measured, proved, and so on, and revealed to everybody.
I know.
Yeah. So if it requires something that Krishna Ji may perceive, it will never become a scientific fact because all others are not able to perceive that. So it is that which is common body of knowledge which can be demonstrated to all and which will be acceptable to all. That is what science has imposed a restriction on itself. I would like to end this talk with Krishna Ji's statement about the religious mind and the scientific mind. I think it will partly answer this question. He said the religious mind has no dogma. It has no belief. It moves from fact to fact, which is why the scientific mind, the religious mind is a scientific mind. But the scientific mind is not a religious mind.
Not a?
Not a religious mind. The religious mind is a scientific mind, but the scientific mind is not a religious mind. The man who is trained in the knowledge of science is not a religious, does not have a religious mind. So that's the whole story. Religion has a larger canvas than science. Science is part of that religious quest for truth. It is the truth about how nature functions. There, science can use the scientific method, and they have used and they have come to a lot of understanding of all natural phenomena, including the phenomena in our body, functioning of our body and so on. But consciousness is outside the realm, that realm, because there is not you are not able to measure it. So I doubt whether science will ever be able to come
even
to that.
Compassion?
It may come to, scientists would come to the conclusion that there is something missing. And already that is there. For example, I talked about quantum mechanics. There is a suggestion in quantum mechanics, not all scientists agree with it, but great scientists like Pauli and Wagner and so on, they made this proposal that in quantum mechanics, things exist in multiple states. And then when you observe, the fact that a conscious observer is observing makes the system fall into a particular state. It is called the collapse of the wave function. And they introduced consciousness there. They said that that's the only place where in the physicists or scientific realm, consciousness enters. Through this suggestion that it needs a conscious observer to select a particular state. Now let me explain this a little bit because it sounds a bit mysterious. You see, an electron, if you set up an experiment to observe its interference pattern, it shows the interference pattern and functions like a wave. If you set up an experiment to observe its particle properties, it reveals its momentum and particle properties. That means somehow my choice, conscious choice of what I want to observe is dictating the behavior of the particle. It's determining the behavior of the particle. So there, they said that consciousness enters into science in the collapse of the wave function. Otherwise, it exists in both states in parallel. But not all scientists accept that. That's just it.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, I also want to ask a question.
Sure.
This means that system is all inclusive. This order, disorder, then entropy and enthalpy, and all this is observer is explaining all this. Otherwise, system is all inclusive. What do you have to say? This is only the interference of the observer is creating all the issues.
It's not clear to me your question, sir. Observer.
This the system, whole system, this order and disorder. This only we are discussing. This as a person or as an individual.
No, what I said was, yeah, I have got the question now. No, sir, order and disorder in terms of consciousness is completely different from what scientific definition of order and disorder. In science, order and disorder, there is a formula. Entropy S is equal to K log W, where W is the total number of ways in which that system can be realized with the same energy. So if you take a pack of cards where everything is arranged in order, that means Ikka, Badsha, etc., like that, and the whole pack is, then it is complete order, then the entropy is zero. If you mix it up, then the total number of ways in which that system can be realized, mixed up system, becomes very large. And therefore, logarithm, that W is the total number of ways in which that system can be realized with the same energy. So that's how they define order and entropy and order and disorder. Whereas in consciousness, when we talk about order and disorder, you're talking about conflict within, and not the same thing, completely different thing. Never use the same terminology without defining the terms. I mean, it's all right to use order and disorder here in psychology, but you have to define what you mean by that. It is completely different from what it means in science.
Should I finish it right now, sir?
Yes, please.
I think so. Thank you, sir.
Already
Thanks a lot for
12:45. Sir, Dubey sir, please announce the next lecture and the lecture of Krishna sir on 10th January. Two things you have to do, please.
You have already said
10th
that
January.
Professor Krishna will be talking to us again on 10th of January. And next Sunday, we have Clemis Peter. She is from Brazil, but she lives in Adyar, I mean, in Theosophical Society. She'll be talking to us on the whole of life with relationship. So we'll be meeting again next Sunday at 11 o'clock. And all of you are please welcome to join us. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Please close it. Please close it.